We've been told that empathy is the highest form of emotional intelligence. That to be kind, to be good, to be a decent human being is to always try to understand, right? To open up your heart, to stand beside someone in their pain. But what happens when standing beside them starts to feel like you're kneeling underneath them? When your heart becomes this emotional storage locker for someone else's wounds and their healing becomes your responsibility. See, empathy at its best, it connects us. It gives breath to the suffocated and it gives presence to the abandoned. But unchecked empathy can slowly shapeshift into something entirely different, into over-responsibility or guilt-driven rescue or even chronic enabling. And then we start to confuse helping with saving and support with fixing, and we start loving others while losing ourselves. It's subtle at first, and you're just being there to begin with, or you're offering support, and you're just doing what a good person would do. But over time you realize that you're doing the emotional labor for both of you. You're carrying the weight of someone else's choices, and you're exhausted, not only physically, but even spiritually and emotionally. Because you thought that empathy was supposed to heal, and now it's starting to harm. Not just them, but also yourself as well. This episode is for those of us who've ever felt trapped in our own compassion, who've been praised for being so understanding while quietly inside we're breaking down. We're the ones who have asked, if I don't help, if I stop helping, does that make me selfish? Or does that finally make me honest? Let's start here. Empathy is not inherently enabling it. But when we don't anchor empathy in integrity, when we don't stay connected to our own limits and our own truth and our own capacity, it becomes performative care. It starts to feel like serving out of fear of guilt and abandonment more than actual growth of the person that we're trying to help. You see, empathy is powerful, but power without direction is dangerous. So let's give some direction here. Let's talk about where empathy ends and where enabling begins. Here are some hidden reasons for why we overcare. See, most of us who struggle with enabling aren't doing it because we're naive. We're doing it because somewhere deep down we learned that being helpful is how we stay loved. Maybe we were the peacemaker in our family growing up, the one who knew how to smooth the tension and to anticipate needs and to absorb pain. Maybe we learned early on that love was earned through usefulness and that worth was tied to sacrifice, and staying quiet about our own needs was how we kept the peace. And so we became fixers and listeners and emotional caretakers. And over time, empathy became our identity. Not just strength, but also survival strategy. It felt noble and selfless and mature. But beneath that, it was also afraid. Afraid that if we stop being the dependable one, the understanding one, the emotionally available one, that we wouldn't be wanted at all. And this is how empathy becomes entrapment. When we need to be needed to feel worthy, we in essence stop seeing others clearly. We unconsciously keep them in a pattern that ensures that they will still need us. Because if they grow or if they get healthy or stop depending on us, what happens to our role? What happens to our value? See, empathy becomes enabling when it stops being about their liberation and it starts being about our sense of belonging. And here's some signs perhaps that you've crossed that line, and maybe helps to know if you have moved into that zone. You feel resentful after helping. Like real empathy, it doesn't leave you bitter, because it often violates your own needs while pretending that it doesn't, right? So you keep offering advice that never gets taken, but you can't stop because their lack of progress feels like you're a failure. and you're more invested in their healing than they are. And you research therapists, you rewrite their resumes for them, you craft their apology texts, you become their executive assistant for emotional growth, and you're afraid to set boundaries. You worry that saying no will make you be the bad guy, or that they will fall apart without your help. And you don't feel like yourself anymore. Your needs, your passions, your rest, all take a backseat to supporting them. And then you become this ghost in your own life. If any of this resonates, just take a breath here. Because this is not about shame. This is about permission. Permission to let your empathy grow up. Not harden, not disappear, but just mature. Because empathy isn't meant to eclipse you. It's meant to connect you. And if your connection to others is costing you your connection to yourself, something has really gone sideways. See, empathy is supposed to be a bridge, not a leash. And if it's binding you to people who refuse to walk their own path, it may be time to reassess who you're trying to help and why. But let's go deeper. Because many of us who chronically overcare, we believe we're just being good people, right? We don't realize that we're actually outsourcing our sense of worth. We've mistaken constant empathy for character, when sometimes it's just codependence dressed up in virtue. And when we don't realize that, we end up drained and disappointed and often quietly bitter, not just at the people we're helping, but at ourselves, for continually choosing others over our own peace. So, what does mature empathy look like, though? It's empathy that holds presence without taking over. It's empathy that offers support without stealing someone else's responsibility. It's an empathy that cares but refuses to carry. And it begins with this radical shift, understanding that your worth is not tied to your well-being. See, when we forget that, we fall into the trap of saviorism. We believe that it's our job to fix people, to rescue them from their own consequences, to shield them from discomfort. But the truth is, comfort doesn't always equal growth, does it? Sometimes comfort sometimes the discomfort is what awakens people. Sometimes hitting a wall is the very thing that they need to decide to climb. And when we constantly pad that wall and soften it and explain it away, we may likely be robbing them of the opportunity to reckon with themselves. And we deny them their own transformation in the process. See, empathy, when it's rooted in integrity, it doesn't bypass truths. It doesn't stay silent to keep the peace. It doesn't say yes when the body is screaming no. Empathy honors your limits. It knows that your compassion is only real if it also includes you as well. See, that's what makes the difference between integrity and enabling. Enabling says, I'll keep sacrificing myself so you can feel better. Whereas integrity-rooted empathy says, I care about you, but I also care about me, so I refuse to betray myself pretending that you're okay. Empathy without boundaries isn't empathy, it's just erasing yourself. And if we're being honest, some of us are really addicted to helping because it gives us a sense of control. We don't trust others to figure it out on their own, so we insert ourselves again and again into their lives, not realizing that we've made ourselves the center of someone else's healing journey. And that's not compassion, that's fear. Fear of irrelevance, fear of being alone, fear that if we stop doing, then we'll stop mattering. But we don't have to live here, because real empathy is not about control. Real empathy is about witnessing, being with, not doing for, inviting, not insisting. But let's call out the lies that we tell ourselves that keep us trapped in enabling, shall we? One might go like this. They're just going through a rough time, which of course they are. Life is hard, but if the rough time never ends, and you're always the one who's making excuses, it's no longer a season, it's actually a system that you're in. You may say, they've had so much trauma. Yeah, and trauma does deserve tenderness, but trauma is not a hall pass for harming others or for permanently avoiding growth. And they may say, if I don't help them, who will? That's a scarcity lie. The fear that if you step back, they'll fall. Here's the thing, falling might be the first time they touch the ground with their bare feet. Some might say, I'm strong enough to carry this, right? Maybe, but for how long? Strength really isn't about how much weight you can hold. It's really about learning and knowing when to let go. See, these lies keep us bound and they make us feel morally superior, but emotionally depleted. And they sound noble, but they're not true. And the longer we live by them, the more we train other people to lean on us instead of learning to stand on their own. But there is another way, and it starts with this question. Is my empathy helping them grow or just stay comfortable? See, sometimes the most compassionate thing that we can do is to stop protecting someone from the consequences of their choice. It doesn't mean that we stop caring. It just means we stop carrying. It means that we stop making ourselves the buffer between them and their growth. Because the truth is, you can't love someone into accountability. You can't feel enough for both of you. You can't do their inner work, no matter how much insight you might have. Real care is letting people face themselves. And real love is letting yourself be whole, even if it means you're walking away from a relationship that really only functions when you're shrinking. Empathy is not infinite. It has capacity. And pretending otherwise is not virtuous. It's really quite destructive to them, to you, to the connection that you both really deserve. See, boundaried empathy says, I will not abandon myself to love you. And that may be the most loving thing that you could ever do. So, how do we break free? How do we stop enabling while we're still holding empathy? See, the answer isn't to shut down or to become cold. It's really to mature your empathy, to upgrade from over-functioning and fixing to honest and present companionship. But let's start with the most important step, I think, and that is name the pattern out loud, even if it feels awkward. We can't shift what we don't name, right? And that means we're willing to face what is actually happening in the relationship. So you might say to yourself, I keep bailing this person out and they never change. Or this person vents to me for hours, but they never take action. Or I'm exhausted from always being the emotional support when no one asks how I'm doing. These aren't complaints, these are signals. Signals that your care has become a cushion, and that unless that cushion becomes a mirror, the cycle will not stop. See, awareness is really the beginning of integrity, and in this case, it's the first crack of enabling them. So ask yourself, who am I if I stop helping? Secondly, this is where it likely gets uncomfortable, because sometimes the need to help is really tied to your identity. You might say, if I'm not the one that they count on, am I still valuable? Or if I stop giving advice, will I still be needed? If I say no, will I be abandoned? These are the deeper questions that one really, where the enabling starts to surface as a pattern. But here's the truth. If your worth depends on someone else's crisis, you're not in a relationship. You're more in a transaction. And it's not your fault. Most of us, I think, were raised in these systems that equated love with sacrifice that told us that good people never walk away, that taught us to stay silent would make us feel shame. But we don't have to live that story anymore. We can actually be kind and clear and caring and honest and loving with boundaries. So the third thing is let the silence do its work. When we stop stepping in and let silence and discomfort be, maybe even backlash, this is where I think most people will cave, right? Because it feels mean to not respond, like you want to say something. It feels cruel not to step in and try to fix. But silence is not absence. Silence is an invitation. It's a space where responsibility might finally be able to bloom. See, when someone's used to you doing all the emotional labor, your pause will feel like abandonment, most likely. But it's not. It's really a return to power, to them, to their choices, to the possibility that they might actually step up because they have to. See, you don't need to fill the silence. You just need to trust it. And then finally, communicate the shift with honesty and compassion, okay? This is where you decide to stop enabling and to help them name the change. It doesn't have to be dramatic or accusatory. It can sound something like this. You could say, I love you, and I believe in your ability to figure this out. And I'm not going to be offering advice this time. Or, I notice that I often jump in to try and fix things, and I'm working on trusting you to figure your own path out. Or, it's important to me that our connection includes space for my needs as well, and not just yours. See, this isn't about blame, it's about clarity. You're not punishing them. You're just practicing a different kind of care. One that says to them, I trust you to be able to grow. And I trust myself to be able to step back. And I trust that real intimacy can hold honesty without collapsing. And then also expect some resistance. And in the midst of that, just remember to stay grounded. Not everyone will be thrilled by the shifts that you're making. Some will most likely guilt trip you. Others will accuse you of not caring anymore. And that's because your boundary is threatening their comfort. But that doesn't make it wrong. It makes it new. And new is often misinterpreted as betrayal by those who've benefited from the old version of you. But hold fast, my dear listener. And if you're doubting yourself, just ask, am I acting from love or fear? Is this boundary rooted in bitterness or in truth? Or what would I want someone to model for me if I were stuck? And then let those answers guide you. Because enabling might feel like closeness, but it's actually a barrier to real intimacy. Real intimacy happens when two people are honest and responsible and free. But be warned, when you stop over-functioning, you might start to feel empty because so much of your energy was really wrapped up in someone else's chaos. And you may likely feel guilt and grief, even like this existential kind of a pain that says, if I'm not fixing, then who am I? And that's where the healing begins. That's a space where you start reclaiming yourself, not as a caretaker, but as a whole person with needs and with limits and with dignity. And from that place, you can offer empathy that liberates, not an empathy that entraps. See, if empathy without boundaries traps us, and avoidance masquerades as patience is isolating us, then what does healthy and integrated care look like? Let's walk this out here. Because the goal isn't to become indifferent, right? The goal is to become deeply wise and generous as a human. So number one, redefine what it means to be a good person. See, so many of us were raised with this distorted image of what goodness is. A good person, we were told, sacrifices themselves. They put others first, always, right? And they say yes, even when they want to say no. But real goodness is not about martyrdom. It's about alignment. You are good when your actions reflect your values, not when they erase your identity. You are kind when your care honors both people's humanity and not just theirs. So let's retire the fantasy of endlessly giving to others while we never break down. See, that's not virtuous. That's unsustainable. And that's self-erasing with a halo on. Number 2, make room for equality and mutuality. Real relationships aren't about one person who gives endlessly of themselves while the other one keeps on taking. It's more about reciprocity. That doesn't mean that everything is 50-50. Life, I don't think, works that way. Sometimes one person is in crisis and the other one shows up a bit more, and that's love. But when it's always one-sided, it's not love, that's more like a drain. Mutuality means that you're checking in on both people's emotional states. You're giving each other room to have needs and voice limits. You're listening as much as you're talking. You're being willing to say, I'm not at my best right now, instead of pretending that you're fine. And when care flows in both directions, no one has to feel the collapse to close down, right? And then use empathy, thirdly, as a mirror and not as a crutch. Here's what empathy sounds like when it's mature. It says, I hear your pain. What do you need to do about it? Or, that sounds hard. Do you want to vent or do you want to problem solve? Or, I'm here for you, but I can't do this for you, right? Notice what these phrases do. They reflect, they invite, and they return their power. They don't rescue, they don't fix, they don't really over-identify, they just witness. This is the kind of empathy, I think, that builds strength instead of dependence. It's the kind of empathy that trusts people to find their own legs. And then fourthly, hold boundaries as acts of love. A boundary is not a wall, it's a doorway. It says, this is how we can stay connected without hurting each other. And sometimes the most loving thing that you can say is, I care about you too much to keep doing this dance. Or, I'll support your healing, but I can't carry your choices. Or, I want to stay in your life, and that means that we need some new patterns. See, boundaries are invitations to deeper healing. They say, I want us to keep walking together, but not like this. And if someone refuses that kind of an invitation, that's information, right? Not judgment or condemnation. Just information about what they're ready for. And then fifthly, create space for people to rise. See, there's a quiet kind of a faith in letting people struggle. And it's not cruelty, it's a confidence. It says, I know that you're capable of growth. And that belief can be a seed. But it only grows if you don't dig it up every time things get messy. So let people wrestle with their own consequences. Let them face their own discomfort. And let them sit with their own silence, if you would. That doesn't mean that you're abandoning them. It just means that you're staying connected without interfering. And if they rise, you'll get to witness their transformation. Not because you carry them, but because you believed in them enough to stop carrying. And the deeper reward is you get to come back to you. When you stop enabling and start practicing true empathy, something beautiful happens. And that is you return to yourself. You're no longer this reaction machine. You're no longer defined by someone else's chaos. You're no longer addicted to being needed in order to feel loved. You, in essence, become yourself, present and grounded and free. And from that place, the relationship begins to shift. And it's true, some will fall away, which is okay, right? Others will deepen, and that's sacred. But the most profound shift, I think, is the one that happens on the inside, where your empathy becomes honest, and where your care includes you as well, where your presence is no longer a lifeline for others, but a lighthouse from which you're able to shine. Let me tell you some final thoughts. If you take one thing away from this episode, let it be this. Empathy is not supposed to be a trap. It's supposed to be a pathway, not to dependency, but to your dignity. Not to guilt, but to growth. And when you care without collapsing, you're modeling a new way of being in the world. One where people are not projects, and love doesn't have to be laborious. You become a reminder that relationships can actually be spacious and sovereign and still deeply connected. And you become this mirror of integrity and intimacy. And you show others that there is another way. Thanks for listening on this episode. Let me know your thoughts, your anecdotes in the comments below. I'll see you in the next episode.